Okay, welcome to this new edition of the Dialogues of the International Academy of Information Studies. First of all, thanks to the presenters and thanks to the nice colleagues and friends of the audience. And today we are dealing with a big topic of scientific, epistemological, and philosophical, and of course biological relevance. And our invitees to discuss today are Professor John Torday from UCLA University, Faculty of Medicine. He is a reputed experimentalist of the lung system, and he is a brilliant theoretical biologist. And we have on the other side Professor Youri Timsit from the French National Research Center. He works with the core of life, the machine where all our cells organize their living. It is the ribosome, and he has made brilliant studies, experimental and bioinformatic, on the protein and RNA and many new findings on the ribosome. So that's it. We start the presentation with Youri Timsit, and that's it. Youri, please.
So I start?
Yeah.
I start. Okay. So I have to share the screen. Okay.
Pedro, may I ask colleagues to mute microphones? Everybody, everyone.
Now. Is it okay?
Yeah. You can put full screen.
No. It's okay?
But not in full screen.
It's okay. It's full screen.
It's as far full as your own titles allow, yeah?
Yes, but the problem, I don't see my own screen. Arrêtez, ignorer. It's okay, you see the screen or not?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, we see the screen. We see the screen.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to present my research on ribosome, and thank you for speaking about Charybdis and Scylla. I was reading the Odyssey a few months ago, and it's interesting to make this parallel between Darwin and Ulysse. Okay, it's here. You still see the screen? It's okay?
Yes, we see.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes. So it's interesting because it's a long journey.
Youri, there is a switch on your presentation. It says animation. Start from this slide as an animation. This is probably what you wish for.
Like this?
There is somewhere there is animations. Go up to animations.
It's okay here?
It is better now. Yeah.
It's better? Okay. Okay. There is some link between Ulysse and Charles Darwin because they have both made a journey with a boat. And also, it took 20 years for both of them to achieve their ultimate purpose. One is to go back home and to find a kind of truth. And for the other also, Darwin, after his trip, had 20 years to write his book on evolution. So I think it's interesting to see a parallel between these two stories. and in particular the demons which have impeded the travel of both of them, and in more general, how some demons or other things impede the scientific progress. So there is some recursive loop between epistemology and the object of studies. So, for example, the evolution of life has some analogy with the evolution of idea. We will see it at the end of the talk. And so I will start by this general question asked by Pedro. What are the principles of life organization? And as more as I study all the life at all the scale, I'm very frustrated because we accumulate a constellation of anecdotes at all scales. If you see animals, macroscopic scale, or the structure of protein at the nanoscale, you have a constellation of anecdotes, and it's difficult to find general principle of life organization, except the general theory of evolution. So, what can we say as the most general and the most simplified summary of what is life? We could say that it's a complex system, of course, life, with dynamic interaction networks at all scale. And all scales, so I represent here the network, and the node could be atoms, amino acid, when you speak about proteins. So there is amino acid interaction inside the protein. There is nucleotide interaction inside nucleic acid. You can have exactly the same kind of network when you see the interaction between protein or macromolecule. And you can have also network interaction when you have cells, interaction between cells in biofilm, in cell of organism, different cell. And of course, you have also a network of interaction when you see organism in ecosystem. So it's a way to consider life, to see this scale, different scale network. But what is very interesting is at all scale, and we will see in the movie at the end, all scale we have some behavior, emergent property at all scales. So, for example, if you see the emergent property of a protein, could be its catalytic behavior. If you see property of a different cell to form an organism, it's a behavior, predation, or something like that, or mating, or living. Okay, so as it is in the context of informational study, I just recall a central dogma of information flow in biology, and which is very, very reductive, of course, I recognize, but there is this information stored in molecules that are used by the cell to make a protein. And I think that you know this process. So DNA is transcribed in mRNA, messenger mRNA, and this messenger RNA is translated into protein by some very huge macromolecular structure, which is called the ribosome. And during a long time, ribosome was considered just like a dot in a cell, just a dot, something abstract And 20 years ago, people have solved the structure, and they have the Prix Nobel, the structure of the ribosome. Ramakrishnan, Steitz, and Yonat, and of course Marat Yusupov and Harry Noller was very important in this contribution, and it was a kind of revolution. Okay, the ribosome, just to make a summary, the ribosome is very important for several reasons. First, it is considered as a living fossil, so a representative of earliest form of life. So it's very important when you look on a ribosome, it's like you look in the first life form, because it evolved by accretion around a very ancient core, which is the peptidyl transfer center. The ribosome is formed by 2/3 of RNA here and 1/3 of protein, which are anchored inside. And this machine. Oh no, I'm sorry. I will not take. I will not talk about machine, but this organelle is able to translate the genetic code, so to convert the sequence of nucleic acid, so RNA, into protein. So it reads the mRNA and makes a protein. Okay. One of the first question unsolved after the structure of the ribosome, because the structure has answered to a lot of questions. How does the ribosome accept the tRNA? How the protein is made step by step? But one of very intriguing and unsolved question was why the protein, which are represented here, colored, I have removed the RNA for showing this strange phenomena. Why the protein have long filament going in the center and fulfilling between the RNA molecule? Why are they? What are they doing? Okay, and so the hypothesis was that they stabilize the RNA molecule because they are positively charged. Okay, and what I have observed by serendipity, because I was just looking this protein and trying to understand the property of this long extension. And I have observed that these long filaments, okay, are systematically connected to other proteins. This is depicted here with all the protein here, and you see there is systematic connection between the protein. And if you look, you compare the bacteria to the eukarya, this phenomenon is amplified, very amplified in eukarya. So there is a very complex network of interaction. Okay, so at this time, it was in 2016, I proposed, because these interactions are very small, and when you, in general, when you have interaction between proteins, they are very large to stabilize the interaction. Here, they are very small. They have a very tiny surface of interaction, but they are extremely conserved. And the network has some analogy with a network of neurons at the cellular scale. So I propose the idea that there could be an equivalent of a network for transferring signals, because they are not, we cannot justify their presence to stabilize them. So why they are here? Perhaps for transferring some signal across the ribosome. Okay, this was the first hypothesis. And so I call this small interaction surface the molecular synapse and the filament the molecular wires. So after I have carefully compare all the kind of the ribosome, the bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and I found that during the evolution, the network of interaction are modular and grouped around a functional center. For example, the binding site of tRNA, the peptidyl transfer center, or the peptidyl tunnel. And these interconnections are growing across the evolution. So probably this complexity of the network correlates with the complexity of the task of the ribosome during evolution, because the ribosome of eukaryotes are very complex and accomplish very complex tasks and takes into account a lot of parameters, of cellular parameters, of signal and everything. So the ribosome, before this, was considered as a molecular machine. Of course, I should start with this diapositive, of course. First, it was considered as a ribosome because the true reaction, so making the peptide bond, is made by the RNA molecule, not by the protein. And what is moving is the RNA too. And so the protein in the ribosome was not very considered as important, because it was difficult to understand their role in the ribosome. Okay, so for example, here there is a movie. Okay, I made because they consider that the ribosome is a machine. I put the music of Mosolov, which is Iron Foundry, and so you see everything. So the RNA, for example, going into the active site. And you will see the protein. So here the channel of the tRNA, the transfer RNA. This is the RNA, and you will see the protein. Okay, exit by the. Okay. This is the protein exiting by the tunnel. So it's a very complex molecular mechanism. So I stop. It's a very complex molecular mechanism. And as you can see in this slide, there is a summary of the motion. There is a two subunits, a small and a large one. The small subunit here turn continually around the large subunit. And there is inside each subunit you have indicated by the arrow a lot of very complex motion. And it's difficult to accept that all these motions are Brownian, and because there is at least 30 fragments moving relatively to each other. And one idea is that the network here plays the role of a sensorimotor network that controls the motion and also informs the ribosome from side to side what happened. The protein is here, the tRNA is here, so you need to know, the protein innervate like a neuron, and all the center, the functional center of the ribosome, and is able to transmit this information on the whole ribosome by this complex network. So recently, we have checked with mathematician and Daniel Benquin, for example, who have helped me to characterize the property of this graph and to see what are, for example, the centrality maxima of this network, and they correspond, for example, betweenness centrality correspond to the most important functional center where the peptide bond is linked. So it was an interdisciplinary study with mathematicians to connect graph theory with biology, structural biology. And so we have found recently, it's just published, by a study on moving ribosome, that effectively the RNA move. It's shown here. You have in red a protein, and the RNA is moving around the protein. It was not found before because people were interested by RNA and not by protein. So the RNA move around protein, and protein are able to control at each step of the translocation, because there is different step when the tRNA are moving inside the. They are able to control the motion of RNA. And that I propose is, since they are connected together, like here, they can change, for example, to summarize their electrostatic potential, and sometimes attract and sometimes repel the RNA. And all these interaction, electrostatic interaction between the protein in the network can modulate and control the motion of the RNA. So, to summarize the biological organization of life, we can say, for example, that we have, for example, dynamic interaction between amino acids to form the motion of to control the motion in a protein and control the catalysis in the active site that you see here, for example. But we can have also very complex motion. This is a movie done by Prakash, and this is not Sheila or a monster with an animal. It's a unicellular organism with any neuron, no neuron. And I start again, as you see, it's this organism is a ciliate, Lacrimaria olor, is able to capture prey. Look, up, it catches paramecia, a moving paramecia. Okay, so this is a property of life that even without neuron, you can make a special, very complex behavior of sensory motor behavior. And how it's possible? Because, as we see here, for example, another central dogma in neuroscience is behavior are encoded or made by nervous system. So I come back here. Here, you see another property of life, which is moving of animals, but this animals is making something much more complex than just moving and mating. These animals, this fish, puffer fish, has formed mandala on the sand, which is 1 meter, more than 1 meter of diameter. So it's very strange. And here you have Teresa, the Kersmaker, a choreographer, doing the same, okay, by dancing. And there is so motion from a protein and from protein to human are able to produce various behavior and ultimately art, dance, and choreography. So, if I continue, what we have found on ribosome challenge some central dogma in neuroscience that to accomplish complex behavior, we need brain and complex brain. And so this theory was proposed by a genius, who is Cajal, in the beginning of the 20th century with the neuron theory. He was both a scientific and artist, and proposed that neuron network was able to was the basis of the thinking in some way of the neuroscience. And just before, another guy who was also a genius but less known passed a long time with this his microscope and found that microorganisms were able of very complex behavior, and he has written the psychic life of microorganisms. And so this is an analogy of idea and organism. This is, for example, the decimation and evolution of extant species proposed by Simon Conway Morris and written in the book of Stephen Jay Gould. It was very interesting because it explains the Cambrian explosion 600 million years ago. And so there is extant species, and most of the species have disappeared, but some of them continue, and we belong to this branch that continue. And I propose that we have the same with idea. So the theory of Cajal was so important and so wonderful that the theory of behavioral science without neuron has disappeared, has not continued. So it's a decimation of a lot of theory. And I just propose now that we can explore the tree of life of behavior. For example, here we are in Opisthocomte in a very small branch here, you know, with animals, and the life of eukaryotic life is very huge, and we have on the literature already see that, and Pedro also with bacteria, with collective, Pedro and George Navarro also, collective behavior of unicellular can have some what we can call intelligence. So there is a big program to continue to explore the behavioral and cognitive property of unicellular without brain. So this is what the study of ribosome and the molecular brain of ribosome stimulate to me to explore this complex sensory motor and learning ability of unicellular cell. So to continue with this Charybdis and Scylla and other about life, we have a set of monsters during the journey of Ulysse, and we can make some parallel between what they did during the Odyssey and what they can do during our scientific activity. And for example, we have Polypheme, the Cyclops, Circe, the Sirens, Calypso, are demons today, and the seduction of appearance, the fascination of the media, power and technology, the big data, the huge tool for producing data, and dogmatism and illusion of image, of course. And I am a structural biology, and this is the Achilles heel of structural biology, to believe to image, to structure. It is not perhaps the truth of life. And perhaps the worst is caritis, this maelstrom, the total love of reference, the anthropomorphism and functionalism, which is for me the worst thing in understanding life, and of course the machine metaphor, and the concept of function biology, because all this concept and reductionism of Sheila and fragmentation are also obstacles to understand what is life. So there is also good fairies and gods during the Odyssey, and for example, they can help us to make some analogy, to follow all thinkers, like for example Haeckel, the other Darwin of sexual reproduction, the Haeckel with ontology and phylogeny, to make analogy with social science, linguistic, and to have more integrative biology, and of course to be helped by serendipity and analogy. And so just the machine metaphor is interesting to avoid this machine metaphor, because for example this is Aristotle, and these are electric cable. I wonder what he would say if he in front of electric cable without knowing electricity, in a functional way of thinking. It's very difficult to attribute function when you don't know everything. So to finish, the best biologist perhaps was Chaplin, and because he confronts life and a human, a machine. And in the paper of Towards the Idea of Molecular Brain, I propose that this is the worst idea of feeding, because this machine is feeds the poor Chaplin, feeding without feedback. And perhaps Chaplin has the intuition of life, and the obstacle of comparing life with machine. Thank you. I have finished.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Youri. We are a little bit out of time, but it was very nice to hear you. And
Excellent talk. Excellent.
yeah.
So
Well, just watching your presentation in your screen, because you cannot share the screen.
Right. You just want me to
Yeah.
So the premise of what I was about to present is based upon what I consider to be a very important experiment that I published in 2003, showing that in the absence of gravity, cells lose their phenotype. So in other words, the gravitational force is necessary for evolution. And I've been pecking away at that for many years. And so what I was going to present was all the work I've done demonstrating that, in fact, that premise is critically important in understanding how and why evolution has occurred. It's in response to the force of gravity. And so my hypothesis is that, so the cell formed as a topology from lipids. I've shown that. Lipids form micelles spontaneously in water. And in order to maintain that topology, the cell has to continue to basically reinvent itself homeostatically in order to remain viable, to not become extinct. So I invoked Lynn Sagan Margulis's symbiogenesis hypothesis, which he first published in 1967, which is now considered to be a law, symbiogenesis. So that's the property by which bacteria are assimilated by the cell to form mitochondria, and then many other organelles. So the primary idea is that in reality, evolution is really serial homeostasis. And the way I came to that conclusion is as a lipid chemist and a lung biologist, I've come to the realization that every step in the accommodation of oxygen in vertebrates is a function of the role of lipids in the physiology of the cell. So all the way back to cholesterol being synthesized, the Bloch work on cholesterol synthesis was actually to allow for cholesterol to thin the cell membrane for oxygenation. And then subsequently, the peroxisome, to Duv's discovery, similarly was to accommodate oxygen. And it goes on and on like that. So my question actually to Youri was, if everything in evolution is a series of pre-adaptations, or what Gould and Verba called exaptations, what is the exaptation for the ribosome? I'm just curious, because I don't know if it works in your domain, Youri, but in mine it works. It's how I've been able to deconvolute the whole process of evolution at the cellular, molecular level, and at the whole organism level, at least for vertebrates.
I should answer now?
Yeah, that was my question to you, was what is the pre-adaptation? What predated the ribosome? What did the ribosome provide to the cell, or to allow it to adapt?
This is a very interesting question, and of course I have not the answer, but my subjective point of view, because there is this theory of RNA world, of course, and so that the RNA was the first. Okay, I'm not sure that it is. We cannot know, of course, but my opinion, you were speaking about symbiosis, and the symbiosis was well before primary symbiosis between nucleotide and, for example, RNA molecule, nucleic acid molecule, but RNA, and short peptide. And this symbiosis was primordial because the protein needs RNA for replicate. The protein are not able to replicate and to form to start again to be the same, and so they need RNA, and RNA need protein to be more diversified in catalytic function, and perhaps also in signaling, in communication. And so this first event of symbiosis between two kinds of macromolecules perhaps was concomitant with the lipid and the micelle, as you say. So perhaps everything occurs in the same time.
Okay.
It's not possible to imagine that the life form that we know actually have evolved separately. So, as you said, lipid, micelle, small peptide and RNA, small RNA molecule come together and invented the genetic code, because this is perhaps most awful question, the arbitrary genetic code, which is a very huge question. But how to say. There is some recent paper that propose that life occur in the waves, in small sphere of water with electrostatic, comment on dit les éclairs, electrostatic discharge, promoting the formation of organic molecule, and perhaps everything.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to mention that a very important principle that I've reconsidered and have a paper under review for is, in my opinion, ontology and epistemology have to be consistent with one another. You cannot have one ontology and another epistemology. That's wrong, okay? And what I'm considering now is that this phenomenon or this property of gravity is very important for that. In fact, I just was in correspondence with a physicist who has proffered that gravity actually organizes the thermodynamic properties of biology because it's controlling entropy. And so if you consider Schrodinger in his What is Life, he said that life, he thought, was negative entropy within the cell and entropy outside the cell. So perhaps what I bumped into in this gravitation experiment was that when you remove gravity, you remove that boundary between the negative and entropic states. And so that's why you lose the evolutionary principle. That's a big idea, but I just thought I'd float that because I think it's very important in terms of a general understanding of the way in which life has evolved, not as a descriptive process, but as a mechanistic causal process, which can be experimentally tested. Anybody? Okay.
I have just a question, but if you
Okay, are we going to listen to Lou?
if you say that life has started as a molecular, so just molecule, and the question is when you consider molecule, the gravity has no effect because between atoms there are physical force like electrostatic, hydrogen bond, covalent bond, but where is gravity there?
So with all due respect, there is experimental evidence. Dave Deemer at UC Santa Cruz has shown that snowball-like asteroids struck the non-oxidative surface of the Earth before it had an atmosphere. And in those asteroids were water, frozen water, and lipids, polycyclic hydrocarbons. So if you immerse lipids in water, if you wet them and dry them, you get micelles. And those micelles will align along the air-liquid interface. And Klassen and Spooner in 1995 showed that if you deprive those micelles of gravity, they will become heterogeneous. They will not remain homogeneous. And that, like when we were kids playing with soap bubbles, the big bubbles eat the little ones. That's not a platform for life. So I'm saying there's a fundamental, with all due respect, Youri, I understand what you're saying, but that particular relationship of lipids and water is critically important in understanding the origins of life, in my opinion. And I know it's dangerous to hang everything on one phenomenon, but it seems like it holds up in my distillation of all of this. So
thank you. This is very interesting and convincing. You are right. Okay, you convinced me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Kate, do you want to ask? Kate?
Yes. I think there's a way that you can both be right here. Youri, I loved your presentation, and the basic underlying network, the complex system network, is the kind of universal pattern forming process that you're pointing to. And there are people like Stephen Wolfram that are advocating a purely computational view based on the same kind of network. I think where the juncture is here is that the networks are controlling behavior. And you see these networks controlling behavior all the way up and all the way down. But with life, you see these in sensory motor systems. They're sensory systems didn't come before motor systems. They came at the same time as motor systems. And so the part of the sensory stimulus that living systems need to read the environment is coming from gravity. I think John's really important contribution there. It's also coming from electromagnetism, though, and the two things work together. But I'd love to see that paper you just talked about, John, because when the Ted Jacobson work, he's talking about a connection between gravity and a way of an observer in a particular place through something called a Lorentz boost, being able to perceive the gravitational dressings of its own field as heat, as an increase or decrease in heat. And to my mind, that's one of the foundational ways that we perceive energy flows. And
Right, so-
that's
Yeah.
foundational to life.
Yeah, so I
It's
just
energy.
contacted Jacob today, and basically he dismissed me saying
Oh, cool.
this stuff happens at a very, at the Planck scale. And I said, yes, I published a paper last year showing the relationship between symbiogenesis and quantum entanglement. He said, bingo, that's where you want to be. So
Well, nobody knows how
know.
to do quantum gravity yet. So your work can help inform that, I would think. Anyway, there's a
Well,
way,
yeah.
and I wanted to say to you, Youri, that there is, the whole idea of simple rules giving rise to complex behavior. I think that there's a very, very foundational simple rule that's binary that gives rise to all of the computational, informational sort of processes. And living systems experience it as hedonic qualia. It's some tiny way of knowing a difference between something that feels good and something that feels bad, whether it's too much heat, just right heat, too much light, whatever. But you have to know that in order to have an energy flow, in order to have metabolism, you have to be able to eat, and you have to be able to detect food from poison and all of that. And I suggest that came way, way, way back at the beginning, along with the emergence of life, because to run a metabolism, you've got to know the difference. You've got to know what energy is the right amount, so that there's your homeostasis right there. That's the
right,
way I see
right.
it. And from that,
Can I
there's a
just
link
say-
to semantic information all the way up to human ethics and values and morals. So I really want to see that kind of thinking, but it does require a kind of a cognition first way of thinking, and focus on the organ. And I wanted to add to Scott Kelso's work in coordination dynamics. Here you had the picture of the dancer. If you're not familiar with him, look at him. It's all about how control systems have underlying networks, and there is this bistable switching at every layer. And I'm saying that the agentic piece of it is mediated by that simple rule.
Yes.
His work.
Well, I just wanted to interject
Yeah.
that so this,
John, let me suggest that we would like to see your whole presentation, or if you wish, we can go directly to discuss.
sure,
But
no, that's okay.
it would be good.
Yeah. Can I just answer Kate? Because what I've suggested in a paper under review is that the mathematics, so Plato and others have said mathematics originates in the cosmos. But when you consider the symbiogenic principle, that's schlepping the mathematics into our physiology. So now you have the mathematics of the cosmos and our conscious mathematics on par with one another. That's why Weibull could show the Goldilocks effect of the fine-tuned universe. And
I'm with you.
okay, you understand what I'm saying? So I'm saying that what you're commenting on is very important, because the reason we feel comfortable or discomfort is because of our energetics vis-a-vis the environment. It's a real
Exactly.
phenomenon. Okay. So
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
John, do you
Thank you.
want to continue with your presentation?
No, I've given you the basically the essence of what I'm saying, but I'm trying to propose that in an era when AI is going to eat our lunch, when it's going to co-opt our heritage as human beings, I think it's extremely important that the things that Youri is talking about, that I'm talking about, and that are being presented at FIS have to be worked out, because we have to understand what intelligence really constitutes. Otherwise, we're giving up our inherited advantage over other organisms, or to be able to work with fellow men, because it's going to gravitate to local consciousness as the only state. And I'll just briefly, if Einstein were working at that Swiss patent office today, AI would reject it because it doesn't understand non-local emergent properties, and I don't think it ever will. So I'm sorry, I'm on my.
No. It is good. It is nice to hear.
Okay, so
I have a question to you, because I think there is a lot of evidence that bacteria can survive in very upper layers of the atmosphere, and even in the vacuum. I mean, in the vacuum of the cosmos. So maybe my opinion is that the enormous influence of gravity is linked to sensing via cytoskeletons. That's what I think. I agree with you that at the beginning, gravity was very important for this symbiogenesis between membranes, small peptides, and nucleotides. And then this is an important point. And then gravity takes an very important role again when there are cytoskeletons, because there are new sensing capabilities in cytoskeletons that need gravity to make sense on their vicinity.
no, you point out a very important difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. My argument is that the prokaryotes developed, quorum sensing and biofilm as a threat to our forebears, and so we in turn formed those networks that Kate was talking about. I discovered those back when I was in graduate school, the growth factor receptor signaling mechanisms. But what I was going to say was, since we're minimally 70% bacteria, maybe as much as 90% bacteria, they need us because we're sensitive to the environment. Bacteria, I'm not a microbiologist, but my recollection is they have a hard shell. They have a polysaccharide coat. So their cytoplasm is isolated from the environment. Ours is not. So there's this cooperativity between, the bacteria, the microbiome, and us. But the question then is, who's calling the shots? I mean, that's what Huxley, Wells was telling us in War of the Worlds. Bacteria protected us because they need us. They killed the Martians off, but I'm being somewhat hyperbolic here. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that that's an important exception to the rule, to understand the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes, right? Okay.
I am.
But thanks. Okay.
John, could you explain how your theories relate to Youri's and vice versa? Can you show the relationship between the two theories?
Great question, Eric. And I mean that sincerely. It's not just me being whatever. What I see is the question I asked Youri, what predated the ribosome, to understand what the gap is that it's filling, because that gives you insight to how and why those different components of the ribosome appear. So in other words, there's this causal chain of events, in my opinion, and I think it can be demonstrated I don't know much about ribosome biology. I left off with that decades ago, but not unlike the Duve's peroxisome. Certainly there, it's lipids and stress. The question in my mind is, how did the ribosome resolve that problem of the physiologic stress in an ever-expanding cosmos that's causing an ever-changing environment that we have to adapt to? So that's my answer.
I meant more at a more abstract level, where you say we have a molecular level kind of neural networks, and how do you explain the kind of control structures that he's talking about in terms of gravity? So I'm getting at more of the relationship between the control structures, molecular or gravity.
Right. So yeah, I mean, what I would suggest is that I guess I would have to know when the ribosome appears and under what conditions, and that's going to inform you as to what to look at in terms of the reaction of the cell to its environment, and that the answer was the ribosome or some component of the ribosome. It probably was a full-grown ribosome, whatever the core mechanism is. And then you can follow that linearly and show the predictive value of that approach. if that makes sense.
Not really for me. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Well, no, let's talk about embryo development, let's say.
yeah.
We can view embryo development in some ways in terms of Youri, where there is a molecular level neural type of network interaction, but not at the neuron level. And how do you relate the embryological effects in terms of gravity? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so I think we make a systematic error as biologists because we focus on the fertilized egg and then the 2-cell, 4-cell, 8-cell, it's actually high energy phosphate exchanges, cyclic AMP and inositol phosphate. So I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think that that's the way that it has to be seen, as how and why those high energy phosphates exchanges create the each subsequent phenotypic structure, and therefore understand in the context of the geochemistry that those structures appeared in. So Wolpert says, that, what did he say? The phase at which, the mesoderm is introduced to the cell of the embryo is the most important thing you'll do in your life. Well, there was a phenomenon that occurred geochemically that forced that to occur, and that's where you have to start, in my opinion. It has to be seen in the context of that adaptation in order to understand the causal relationships.
I agree that there's a necessary condition, but again, that gets back to this point about a sufficient condition. I think one thing you haven't convinced me of is that your gravitational view of development is a necessary condition, but not necessarily a sufficient condition to explain the difference between the morphological structures of different organisms. They're both under the same gravitational influence, but develop very differently, a frog versus a human versus a fish, etc.
Sure. Well, because I think you have to think of it in the context of when the organism appears and how and why it appears in terms of the context that it appears in. It's only then that you can see the mechanistic causal relationships. So there are 2 other labs that showed the same phenomenon of gravity being necessary for evolution. And in fact, I got bones from NASA showing that the same the biomarker, the parathyroid hormone-related protein gene, was downregulated in the bones of rats flown in low gravity conditions for a couple of weeks, as had another lab in Montreal, at McGill. So I don't know if that answers the question, but in terms of necessary and sufficient, it seems to me gravity is necessary because those cells can't remain in their differentiated state.
I definitely agree with you. I'm just saying it's probably not sufficient to explain the difference between a frog and a fly and a human.
So if I were to try and tackle that, I would try to see where those different species appear in phylogeny, and also ontogenetically, because phylogeny and ontogeny are the same process at different timescales. It's the same thing. And so I'm saying that once you begin to do that, it was a Zuckerkandl who invented that, and Pauling, I think, they invented that clock, analysis. It's kind of like what they said. You have to look at it in the context of when the phenotypic trait appears and under what conditions. And it's only then that you can understand necessary and sufficient.
I don't know, John, I don't know, excuse me. I don't know whether you have searched for differences in tissues regarding gravity. For instance, the lack of gravity for astronauts affects, I don't know, lungs, I don't know, bones, I don't know, the muscles. So, and maybe my suggestion is, does it relate to the cytoskeleton, to the peculiar cytoskeleton, and of course, metabolic process and signaling processes? But maybe a key point would be, what kind of cytoskeleton has this tissue, do you think?
Yeah, no, I understand your question. I'm trying to remember whether we looked at that or not. But I mean, it's important to remember that the experimental conditions in which I found that phenomenon were ones in which there was no matrix between the cells. They were just adherent to these Cephidex beads that have a certain buoyancy. So in terms of tissues, the only organs I know of that are affected by low gravity conditions, at least in humans, are bone. That's called Wolff's Law. And they also develop urinary tract infections because the glomerulus is under it's affected by the gravitational pressure. And if you don't have that pressure, the glomeruli won't function efficiently, and so you develop urinary tract infections. Beyond that, Pedro, I understand what you're asking in terms of basic experimentation in cytoskeleton. Yeah, I'm trying to remember whether we did. I think, yeah, I did something with the cytoskeleton, but I don't remember. It's been so long. I've been in 30 years hacking away at this. So, but great question. No, I sure.
I just wanted to answer to the Eric question and about gravity and to support the idea of John, because when you consider evolution, there is always this question of contingency. Contingency with a small effect, small influence of something in a step that have changed the path of the evolution, and after you cannot recognize it because the path is very long. And so what I'm saying that perhaps, as you said, John, gravity has played a crucial role in the beginning, in the earliest step of life, by playing a role, as you said before, on lipid and micelle formation and constitution. And perhaps after life and organism was relieved of this influence of gravity. This is the idea that I propose, because sometimes there is a metaphor that I like, that you about construction, the building of cathedral, and we don't know when we see a cathedral that it was necessary to build a scaffold by wood to make the stone on the top of together, and all the scaffold was removed before after, and we don't see it. So we cannot infer that there is something else helping to build a cathedral. So perhaps gravity was crucial and essential for the first step of molecular life, and perhaps after organism relieved their dependency to gravity, so explaining why some shapes and morphology escape easily to gravity problem and are influenced by other factors.
D'accord. Yeah, and it's interesting to say that because I've only recently started to consider the matrix, because of the nature of the repair mechanism, because you produce these metalloproteases when the cell is damaged and you have dissolution of the matrix. I think that recapitulates the whole process. And I appreciate what you said about the lack of need for the gravitational principle once you get to a certain level of complexity. I agree with that. However, in an injury repair condition or in development, I think that the cells will refer back to stellar nucleosynthesis and the matrix that's formed by stardust and the elements in a real intangible way. So that would be the exception to that rule that might potentially prove the rule. If you will. But you're absolutely right about it. Yeah. No, because we make us, when people talk about gravity and its effects, it has to be seen in the initiation of the process. Once the process has been set in motion, there are other compensatory strategies that eliminate the need for the relationship to gravity, as you suggest. That's absolutely correct.
Okay, John, can you ask your question, Jerry, please?
Yes. Well, so thank you for the interesting discussions. I'm a bit dismayed, I suppose is the right word, with the absence of much of a connection to information in information theory. and particularly the looseness of the language of physical chemistry is very broad, and you can fit lots and lots of predicates into the notion of physical change without saying much at all about biology or information theory. So I guess, John, given the nature of your assertions and their grounding in various biochemical phenomena, how do you see the information of gravity contributing to these changes, to the entropy involved?
I don't. I think we make a systematic error in focusing on matter. I think it's Whitehead process theory. It's energy that's really underlying the properties of physiology. So I take exception. You know, if we knew what a graviton was, maybe I'd have to eat those words. Well, we don't. So I see it as energy exchanges, as I said earlier, with all due respect. I don't. So Bill Miller and I used to write together until I started talking about the singularity of nature, because I focused on, you know, Einstein's E equals mc squared, and so therefore I concluded personally that energy was superseded the material aspect. So I don't buy into information.
This is just a language that you're using that I don't see that's connected at all to the way that, or the quantitative descriptions which ground the relationships between molecularity as a entity, independent of fancy physical theories. Simply that you have entities with properties. These properties include, if you would, the physics of both gravity or Newtonian gravitational inverse square law and the Coulombic inverse square law. Both of these laws are applicable to all physical chemical systems. And so when you simplify out the concept of gravity and separate it from the concept of electricity, you are adding something to the conversation here that I don't grasp of how it relates to information theory or to a coherent view of the sciences.
It doesn't. And I adamantly disagree. And I've talked to Michael Levin over the years. He's never done an experiment where he's shown that any phenomenon that he's looked at can be, regarding bioelectricity, can or cannot be blocked by an antibody or some blocker of growth factor signaling. I don't understand. I've spent 50 years studying growth factor signaling, and it's a highly, you know, articulated system of growth factors and their receptors. Why on earth would you have those and then default to bioelectricity? It makes no sense to me. Okay, so I'm saying to you, I'm respectful of the information theory, but I think it's secondary or tertiary to with this fundamental energetic process.
So, but my question is a little broader than what you're answering to, and
Okay.
that is, how do you get from the notion of gravity to the notion of a specification of a particular entity or object or identity or reaction or cell or that sort of thing? It's how does that relate to predicate logic? How does it relate to the general notion of a sentence? These sorts of issues that underlie the discussion of information in human communications.
Yeah, so I've shown how physiology has evolved under the auspices of the force of gravity, because you have to think again of the context in which it's occurring. And so the factors that are assimilated through symbiogenesis, it's not by, mass action. It's a function of what the cell is experiencing and how it's going to reinstate its homeostatic set point. And that goes on over and over again. I mean, it's Walter Buchanan and it's Claude Bernard. It's homeostasis.
Okay. Thank you, John. Now let's go for the next question. Carl, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to add some small points to Youri's to the presentation of you both, which Youri has shown us. You call the ribosome as a molecular machine in a fashion or so. I suggest the concept that the ribosome is an accounting machine. that it shows what is possible at what cost. And you are showing us the protein working as a swarm of ants, invading and occupying and digesting something. This is very much far from where I could be helpful to you. If you see, I'm working on what makes an ant. What is the, how are ants related among each other? And what makes an ant to be active? So dissatisfied with its present state. And how do ants communicate, and which economy they maintain among each other, and what are the types of ants? So I'm much lower in the basic science than you are. But I'm very happy that you have found the common ground between ultra-archaic and even more proto-archaic versions of solid constellations, which can be understood as building blocks of life, whatever it is. And specifically, I like your approach to the path of types of objects, which are the paths are predetermined by the properties of the objects. That is a very important statement with which I really concur, and which in my belief is the fundamental dogma, which you do as a side observation. And the rules of translocation is something which I would really love to discuss with you in depth, because as it is, big mysteries have big and simple answers. And in our case, it turns out that it is worth reading, spending time on reading Wittgenstein, and specifically doing the exercises with A plus B is C. You can't thank enough the computers which have advanced us since Wittgenstein, because we have now at our disposal the body of all possible compositions of a whole from two parts. And this is something which is really a treasure. Now, if you treat that collection as it deserves to be treated, as a set of logical statements, which is in itself a colossal truth table, then you find ways that explain very much. Specifically, I'm very encouraged by your question, or by your stressing the importance of the memory. Yeah? Memory is something which we definitely can agree on, because it is that evident what happens there. You see it in the observed fashion, and I describe it in the accounting fashion. Yeah, and it says the same. So the memory is something which allows a very constructive cooperation. And I'd like to offer the works, the results I've done. Among the works connecting to A plus B is C, and using the actual numbers which stand for this statement.
Okay, thank you, Carl. If you don't mind, you can talk bilaterally by email with Youri about your work, because we have other questions and it will be too long for you to explain your whole stuff. Is it okay? I can give you his address if you agree, Youri.
Of course, I would like to continue. I have not well understood what you mean by ant and the insect.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The insect. So you speak about the colony of and the communication between ants.
Yeah. Your protein is for me a collection of ants. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Army of ants.
This is an emergent property of protein, and to become an ant. But first, I've not spoken about a machine because for me, this is always associated ribosome as a molecular machine, and you can find perhaps 7,000 of 10,000 of entry in Google with molecular machine, and this is the main question, and I follow it here, this question of machine, and it's a very complex question. I don't believe that ribosome is a machine. I believe that this is living being, something living already, and it's not a machine because life is not a machine, and so this is a very complex question.
Yeah.
Well, that's where Wittgenstein says, and life is a finite automate.
Is finite what?
Finite automate.
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
We have two more questions. Do you mind if we continue? Eric, please, can you make your question? Eric?
Okay. I have one comment, one question. One thing I like is the debate between Jerry and John. I think I kind of sympathize with John, even though I come from the background of a logician. I like the idea of challenging the sort of semantic view of truth and falsity, whereas you're looking at a more strategic view. So I kind of empathize with what you're saying, but I agree with the hesitancy that Jerry expresses. Now on to Youri. I'd like you to expand your slide where you talked about the Cambrian explosion, but on the other side, where you have the Cambrian development of these molecular information processing networks. Can you say something to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting question about. So I think that life. No, I don't think, but I'm starting to observe by looking at the ribosome that perhaps life from the beginning is not possible. It's not dissociable from information and signal transmission and intelligence. So
Yeah, but when I can interject something, I think John is getting at something too. It's not just information in the classical sense of Shannon.
Yes.
It's also strategic kind of information. I know I talk about this. I've written articles on social agents, etc., and their strategic processes that are involved. So I mean, I kind of like the idea of this evolution of a signaling system that's kind of analogous to a neural network, but is actually at the molecular level, as you say. Very interesting thing. I'd like you to continue to comment.
Yes, I understand, but I don't know if perhaps it was like a Big Bang Cambrian explosion, but at the molecular level and well before, perhaps 4 billion years ago, when the first molecule started to organize together with lipid, nucleic acid, and protein. And perhaps it was not possible to be alive without intelligence and signaling system at different level, but different kind of. There is signal like electrostatic electric wave, as proposed by Michael Levin. But also molecule can be signalization, like a small molecule like ATP, so there is no difference between energy and information. I don't know what is information, but I prefer to speak about signaling. And I think life and information or signaling was born together. Without signaling and information.
Yeah, right, and what's interesting is the relationship, as you point out, between the difference or the interaction between information and action, because you're talking about a system where you link the two, and I think Kate was talking about that as well.
Yeah. Okay, Youri, if you don't mind, let's go to the next question because Krasimir, very patient, waiting. Krasimir.
Thank you very much. First of all, it was very interesting lectures and discussion. I have a little remark to John about gravitation. I think it is very, very important for our life, but not only gravitation of the Earth. We need to take in account, for example, gravitation from the moon. And other sources of gravitation. So this is a very complex problem. This is my remark. And to Youri, I have a little questions. At what lowest level information appear? For example, if you switch on the switcher of the lamp and lamp white, this is not information for the lamp. This is direct sending energy to the lamp. So information appear when we have sensor and recognizing the signal from the sensor. And my question is, at what lowest level we have recognizing the signals? Thank you.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. When you switch on and off a light, it's an energy problem question, but it could be information, as you know, by Morse. Morse is communicating by switch on and off.
Yes. I speak only for the simplest variant when you switch on and lamp white. If you have control unit, of course, you send information to the control unit and the control unit make decision. Yes. But I show that direct reflection of impulses is not information. Information we have when we need to recognize the signal and to decide what to do. So my question is, what is the lowest level? Biomolecule or somebody say that on level of atoms or more high level? What is your opinion about this?
Let me say something. At the precellular level, what we are calling in prokaryotes one component system, this is the lowest level of signaling. People have not paid attention to the revolution of the discovery of the one component systems. So your question is very pertinent from the evolutionary point of view. One component system is the response.
Yes, I agree with you, Pedro. But this is in the step of bacteria, and it's already a very evolved step after Luca. And in a cellular, for one component system, you need a very complex protein organization. And communication between them to transmit. But before the cellular stage, what was we can speculate? What was perhaps it could be in the Hamlet sentence to be or not to be. This is an information to be or not to be. Just to be, to exist. A molecule when a molecule is here or not here, is already an information. I don't know. I think it's very interesting because perhaps the first amino acid were already an information because they have some property. So it's very difficult to dissociate the component of life and information. Each component of life will be information because to be present in a system is an information. I don't know. It's a very interesting question.
It's very complex, very complex. Next question. Yes. Excuse me. We have, okay, you respond, John, and then Jerry, and finally Eric, and we will close.
I just wanted to go back, Jerry, back to what Carl was saying about memory. So lipids express molecular memory. They express hysteresis. So, and Shostak who won the Nobel for his work on origins of life, he showed experimentally that lipids can synthesize DNA. DNA cannot synthesize lipids. Okay. And to Eric's point about gravity versus matter, I think we were talking about, I challenge anyone to show, we've shown that gravity is necessary for evolution, unequivocally. There's no piece of information in a cell that you can remove that would cause total collapse of that cell. It's just not going to happen, okay? So, and to Krasimir's very apt comment about the gravitational source, I ran a service lab at a preeminent hospital, Harvard Teaching Hospital, and I used to do analysis to determine whether a woman was ready to be delivered or not. And I was able to show that the phases of the moon affected that process. So it is a real phenomenon, and the moon is a very critical variable in what I talk about, with no question. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Youri, please, your question. Youri, Youri, your microphone.
Sorry. Thank you. So I'd just like to comment on Youri's presentation, which I thought was excellent. And I particularly think that the parts of the significance of his work have not been adequately addressed in this discussion. And they do very closely tie with the notion of both evolution as well as information theory, as well as the complexity of life and the emergence of life from simpler sources. So I really think these aspects of his presentation have not been adequately addressed in this discussion. And one can start here with the notion that not a gravitational notion, but the other inverse square law, that is Coulomb's law, as a contributing factor in emergence of life and its relationship to the formations of organisms, starting from the notion of the identity of the individual atoms, and then the combination, like A plus B goes to C, to make a molecule, such as going from one hydrogen atom and another hydrogen atom to a hydrogen molecule. And that contains more information than the individual atoms themselves. So the aggregation or concrescence, in the sense of Whitehead, of atoms into molecules is an informational forming process. It creates information in terms of relationships between electrical particles. Now, if I fast forward from those simple 1 + 1 = 2 sorts of things, of one hydrogen atom plus another hydrogen atom gives a hydrogen molecule, and apply this to combinatorics of atoms in general, that is, any number of atoms, like 10 to, I don't know how many atoms in a ribosome, but I suspect it's in the order of several million. And as a consequence, these electrical particles are still there, they're still active, they're still interacting, they're still relating to one another, and they're all organized into the organelle. And so this is what I found Youri's presentation to be very precise, both from an information point of view and an evolutionary point of view. And the clinching argument, or not the clinching argument, but the creative argument here from an evolutionary and emergence point of view was the different sizes of the ribosomes depending on their origins and their historical role in the tree of life. It's a really very critical source of information about the nature of evolution and the complexification of evolution, starting from very simple principles. So, Youri, thank you so much for that nice presentation.
Okay, John, ahead, please.
So Youri, this is kind of a nasty question, but I have convinced myself that we are evolving towards the quantum state. So the work that you do is beautiful, but do you think that it will bring you to that level of understanding that we're transitioning from the classical to the quantum?
Okay, you are not obliged to respond to that.
Just saying. Sorry, I should preface that. I published a paper showing, I mentioned it earlier, the relationship between symbiogenesis and quantum entanglement. There's no question that quantum entanglement is real. 3 Nobelists, won that prize for their work on quantum entanglement. So if in fact that's true, and the Journal of Progress in Biophysics, Dennis Noble's publication, they did a special issue on that very question, recognizing that it is an important question, in my opinion, that we are, just like Bohm said, the explicate order is just a way to get back to the quantum. And we have to be able to segue from certainty to uncertainty as a species, in my opinion. So, but I mean, I'm starting to get into a realm that I think is testable, but it's more metaphysics than physics. So,
okay. Eric, please, and then Carl, and I think that's over, unless Gordana or Kate want to say something. Carl, please, sorry.
Yes, this depends what you call quantum. I'm completely in congruence with you that we need a parallel kind of counting, which is much more exact than the traditional. My suggestion is to use a combinatorial function, which closely resembles the number of ways you can count by using identical units, which is done in the case of your gravity, and as compared to using a gradation method with a slight distortion within it. Yeah.
Okay, Carl, thank you. Eric, please. Eric?
Well, okay. I just again want to focus on Youri's Cambrian explosion. What exactly he meant by that second tree that he wanted to start. Are you saying something about the evolution of information or communication systems at a different level, or what are you trying to say?
Okay, Cambrian explosion is not a concept described by Conway Morris and Stephen Jay Gould about the explosion of a great variety and diversity of animals.
Yes, I know. I'm talking about what you said about the combinatorial, about the explosion from the Cambrian on your slide.
Yes.
We're talking about communication systems at the molecular level, not at the multicellular level.
No. Perhaps I was misleading because I used this slide for showing an analogy between explosion of idea and explosion of diversity. But what is shown on this Cambrian explosion is that there is an explosion of idea. There is a lot of organism, of different form of organism and morphology. But what they have observed that the majority have disappeared, and a few of them and us have continued along the evolution. And I made just an analogy to show that there, in the beginning, for example, of the 20th century, a lot of different ideas about life emerged, like the Cambrian explosion of organism. There is an explosion of idea and potential theories, and most of them have disappeared because there was some dominating organism and dominating hypothesis and paradigms, like the neuron theory of Cajal. And so other theory like the neuroscience without neuron have disappeared. For an analogy.
I think, Youri, that's a very good point. We have missed completely the generation of behavior of the life cycle of the unicellular and the connection to our own life cycles are unicellular within. And I think that we have had two talks that finally have converged the ribosome has appeared as the core of life, the heart, the very heart of life. It is not a machine, it is not a mechanism, and it has almost everything around it. And so I wonder whether gravity is affecting the ribosome of the eukaryote, because the new complexity, the neural network inside, neural protein inside, maybe that's the weak point rather than the cytoskeleton itself. Maybe the ribosome that could be in a subtle way taken away from the accounting mission that Carl sees.
Well, is there any homology between the ribosome and the mitochondrion, for example? Are these different bacterial forms that have, found their way into the eukaryotic cytoplasm to benefit? But I did want to, Etienne Roux published a paper in 2014 in which he said we make a systematic error in thinking about function as the way things appear. What he was encouraging, he didn't go that far, but I'm saying you have to go back in the phylogeny and the phylogeny principally to understand so the whole argument about whether the heart is a pump, it's not a pump in its origins. It's just the cell taking water and particles in and then releasing them. It's that kind of thing which you really have, in my opinion, to focus on, not how it appears now. That's a diversion. Okay, in my opinion.
Yeah, Youri has made a nice table with let's say relatively wrong ideas, with the ideologies around core themes of biology and behavior, nervous system, etc. And that's it. I think we have been almost 2 hours. It has been a very nice time, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was
Thank
very
you.
nice.
Interesting.
It was very nice. Many thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.